Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. Let me tell you about myself first, because understanding who I am makes what happened at Gettysburg all the more real. I've been obsessed with the American Civil War for as long as I can remember. While other kids my age were collecting baseball cards or playing video games, I spent hours poring over battlefield maps, reading first-hand accounts from soldiers, and watching every documentary I could find. There was something about that particular conflict that gripped me. Maybe it was the tragedy of a nation torn apart, or perhaps the individual stories of courage and horror that emerged from those blood-soaked fields. When I turned 12, I managed to convince my parents to let me join a reenactment group. They were hesitant at first. My mother worried about me handling reproduction rifles, even if they only fired blanks. My father thought I should focus on modern sports, but I wore them down with my persistence and genuine passion for history. I joined an Ohio regiment, portraying Union soldiers at various events throughout the year. For 4 years, I immersed myself in that world. I learned to march in formation, to cook over an open fire, to sleep on hard ground in a canvas tent. I made friends with people twice and 3 times my age, all of us united by our love of living history. We weren't just playing dress-up. We were keeping memory alive, honoring those who fought and died. Among those friends was a man named Greg. He was probably in his mid-30s, with a weathered face and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. Greg portrayed a soldier from Virginia, fighting for the Confederate side. He was always trying to recruit me to join his unit for events, arguing that I should experience both perspectives of the war. "You can't truly understand the conflict if you only see one side," he'd tell me, his Virginia drawl thickening for effect. "Besides, we have more fun on the rebel side." I was 16 when I finally decided to take Greg up on his offer. By then, I'd saved enough money from my part-time job at a local hardware store to purchase the necessary equipment for a Confederate impression. The uniform was different enough from my Union gear that I'd need to start from scratch. Gray wool jacket, butternut trousers, a slouch hat instead of a kepi. I called Greg on a Tuesday evening in late April 2017. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. "This better be good," he answered, though his tone was playful. "I'm in," I said simply. "I want to do Confederate reenacting." I could hear the grin in his voice. "Well, it's about damn time. I've got something perfect for your first event, too. We're doing a living history program at Gettysburg in 3 weeks, spending Friday night through Sunday on the actual battlefield. You interested?" My heart hammered in my chest. Gettysburg, the most famous battle of the entire war. I'd read about it, studied the tactics, memorized the names of every regiment involved, but I'd never actually been there. "Are you kidding?" "Absolutely." "Good. It'll be intimate, just our small unit. 8 or 9 guys. We're camping at Spangler Spring, right where the real action happened. Pack your gear, and I'll pick you up Friday morning." After I hung up, I had to convince my parents. My mother was especially nervous about me spending the night away from home with adults she barely knew. But I assured her Greg was responsible, that this was a legitimate National Park Service program, that I'd call every day. Finally, they agreed. The next 3 weeks dragged by like years. I assembled my Confederate kit piece by piece, broke in my new brogans until they stopped giving me blisters, practiced my southern accent in the mirror. When Friday morning finally arrived, I was packed and waiting on the front porch by 6 a.m., though Greg wasn't due until 7. Greg pulled up in his beat-up Ford pickup truck, exactly on time. I threw my haversack and bedroll in the back and climbed into the passenger seat. The cab smelled like coffee and old canvas. "Ready for your first real battlefield experience?" he asked as we pulled onto the highway. "I've been ready for 3 weeks." He laughed. "Good attitude. Just wait until you're standing where those boys actually fought and died. Changes your perspective." The drive from Ohio to Pennsylvania took about 5 hours. Greg filled the time with stories from previous reenactments, some funny, others more somber. He told me about the time a spectator fainted during a battle demonstration because the cannon fire was too realistic. He described sleeping in a thunderstorm at Antietam, the rain coming down so hard it turned their campsite into a mud pit. But he also talked about the weight of what we were doing. These weren't characters in a movie, he said, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. They were real people, teenagers, most of them, younger than you in some cases. They suffered things we can't even imagine. Around 1 in the afternoon, we stopped for lunch at a diner just outside Gettysburg. The waitress, an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun, noticed our period clothing in the truck bed. "Y'all here for the reenactment?" she asked as she poured our coffee. "Living history program," Greg corrected. "Camping on the battlefield itself." Her expression changed, became guarded. "Which part?" "Spangler Spring." She set the coffee pot down harder than necessary. "You be careful out there, that's a heavy place. A lot of boys died there." "We know," Greg said quietly. She looked like she wanted to say more, but another customer called for her attention. As she walked away, I turned to Greg. "What was that about?" He shrugged, but his jaw was tight. "Some locals think the battlefield is haunted. Tourist nonsense, mostly. Though," he trailed off, staring into his coffee. "Though what?" "You'll see." We arrived at Gettysburg National Military Park around 3 in the afternoon. The visitor center was bustling with tourists, families with children running around, elderly couples examining exhibits. But once we drove deeper into the park, following the winding roads to our designated camping area, the crowds thinned. Spangler Spring sat in a low area between Culp's Hill and Rock Creek. Even in the bright afternoon sun, there was something oppressive about the place. The trees grew thick here, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out much of the light. The spring itself bubbled up from the ground, feeding into the creek with a constant gurgling sound. Greg parked, and we began unloading our gear. Within 20 minutes, other members of the unit began arriving. The first was a tall, heavy-set man named Walter, who served as our unit's captain. He had a booming voice and an infectious laugh that immediately put me at ease. "So you're the recruit Greg's been bragging about," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that nearly crushed my fingers. "Welcome to the Virginia boys." 2 more men arrived together, brothers named Leonard and Timothy. They were in their 50s, both sporting impressive beards that would have made any Civil War soldier proud. Then came Henry, who was quieter than the others, with a deep intensity in his dark eyes that made me uncomfortable. Greg had mentioned Henry was a Marine veteran who'd served in Afghanistan in 2008, and something about his bearing confirmed it. As we set up camp, establishing a rough semicircle of pup tents around where our fire would be, Walter explained the program. "We're here to educate visitors about what soldier life was really like," he said. "Tomorrow and Sunday, tourists will come through, ask questions. We'll demonstrate drilling, cooking, that sort of thing. Tonight's just for us to settle in and get comfortable." Around 5 o'clock, a park ranger stopped by. He was young, probably in his late 20s, with nervous energy that seemed out of place for someone in his profession. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just wanted to check in, make sure you have everything you need." Walter assured him we were fine. But then the ranger's expression grew more serious. "I need to mention something. We've had threats lately. People wanting to damage or remove Confederate monuments. It's politically motivated, and while we have security, I'm asking you to be vigilant. If you see anyone suspicious, especially after dark, call us immediately." The mood of the camp shifted. What had been jovial suddenly felt tense. "We can set up a watch rotation," Henry suggested. "Someone awake at all times, armed with a fixed bayonet for authenticity." The ranger nodded gratefully. "That would be helpful. Thank you." After he left, Walter drew straws to determine watch order. I drew second shift, which meant I'd sleep for a few hours, then take over around 2 or 3 in the morning. As the sun began to set, we lit our campfire. The flames cast dancing shadows across the trees, and the temperature dropped rapidly. We passed around a bottle of whiskey that Leonard had smuggled in, along with some historically inaccurate beer. The alcohol warmed my chest and loosened everyone's tongues. Stories flowed freely. Walter told a hilarious tale about a spectator who tried to join a battle reenactment without any prior training, nearly causing a massive pileup. Timothy described his worst camping experience, which involved a bear wandering into camp and stealing their food. We laughed until our sides hurt. But as the night deepened, the stories changed. Henry, who'd been mostly quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Any of you ever experienced something you couldn't explain?" he asked. The fire crackled. No one answered immediately. "I have," Walter finally said. 3 years ago, camping at Antietam, middle of the night I heard marching. Clear as day. Thousands of feet hitting the ground in unison. Woke up Leonard. Asked if he heard it. He did. We searched everywhere. Nothing. No one. But we both heard it. Leonard nodded confirmation. Never told anyone outside the unit. They'd think we were crazy. This place is worse, Henry continued, staring into the flames. Spangler Spring. More men died here per square foot than almost anywhere else in the battle. When the Confederates charged across this ground toward Culp's Hill, they were slaughtered. The spring ran red. Rock Creek, there. He gestured toward the darkness beyond our camp. Bodies stacked up so thick you could walk across the water on them. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. The whiskey suddenly tasted sour. "That's enough ghost stories," Greg said, trying to lighten the mood. "You'll give the kid nightmares." But Henry wasn't done. He turned to me, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "If you see fog coming out of Rock Creek tonight, don't go near it. Don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero. Just stay by the fire." "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because fog doesn't act natural here. It moves wrong. And sometimes..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes the battlefield remembers." We eventually dispersed to our tents around 11. I crawled into my small pup tent, barely large enough for my body and bedroll. The canvas smelled musty, and every time I shifted position, the fabric rustled loudly. Outside, I could hear the first watchguard, Timothy, moving around the camp perimeter. Despite my exhaustion from the drive and setup, sleep proved difficult. My mind kept replaying Henry's warning. The fog. Rock Creek. The battlefield remembers. What did that even mean? I told myself it was just veteran reenactors trying to spook the new guy, a tradition as old as camping itself. Eventually, I drifted into a restless doze. I dreamed of marching, of drums beating, of men screaming. When a hand grabbed my ankle, I jolted awake with a gasp. "Hey, wake up, your turn." It was Henry, crouched at my tent opening. I could barely make out his features in the darkness. "What time is it?" I asked, my mouth dry. 2:30. "Get your gear. I'll show you the route." I pulled on my shell jacket and grabbed my rifle, bayonet already fixed to the barrel. The metal was cold against my palm. Outside the tent, the night was absolutely black. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, providing barely any light. Above us, thick clouds obscured whatever moon or stars might have helped. Henry walked me around the camp perimeter, pointing out landmarks I could barely see. "Stay within sight of the fire," he instructed, "or at least where the fire was. Walk the circuit every 15 minutes. If you see anyone, challenge them first, then come get us if they don't respond appropriately." "What about the fog?" I asked, unable to help myself. He was quiet for a long moment. "If you see it, remember what I said. Don't go near it. I'm serious, kid. This isn't a joke." Then he disappeared into his tent, leaving me alone in the darkness. The first hour passed slowly. I walked the perimeter as instructed, my boots crunching on the grass. Every sound seemed amplified. An owl hooting in the distance, branches creaking in a breeze I couldn't feel, the constant murmur of the spring. My eyes gradually adjusted, and I could make out the shapes of monuments scattered across the battlefield, dark silhouettes against the slightly lighter sky. I checked my watch. 3:15. Halfway through my shift, I returned to the fire and added a few small sticks, coaxing it back to reluctant life. The flames provided minimal warmth, but made me feel less alone. That's when I saw the movement. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer perhaps, or a raccoon. Something dark shifted near one of the monuments about 50 yards from camp. I stood up slowly, gripping my rifle, and watched. The shape moved again, but wrong. Too fluid for a deer, too large for a raccoon. And it seemed to be circling the monument, moving in and out of view, I thought about the ranger's warning. Vandals. People threatening the monuments. The whiskey still warming my blood made me feel braver than I should have. I was responsible for protecting this camp, for guarding these memorials. I couldn't just watch someone deface history. Quietly, I moved away from the fire, keeping my rifle at port arms, my heart hammered against my ribs. As I got closer to the monument, I could see it was one dedicated to a New York regiment. The shape was definitely human-sized, moving behind the granite structure. "Hey," I called out, trying to make my voice sound authoritative. "This is private property. Identify yourself." The figure darted behind the monument completely. I heard no footsteps, no rustling of grass, just silence. I advanced more quickly now, almost running. When I reached the monument, I swung around it with my rifle raised, ready to scare off whoever was there. Nothing. No one. I stood there, breathing hard, scanning the area. The monument was on a small rise, giving me a decent view of the surrounding battlefield. There was nowhere for someone to hide. No trees close enough to reach in the seconds since I'd seen the figure. They couldn't have just vanished. Unless I'd imagined it. Unless the darkness and the whiskey and Henry's ghost stories had gotten into my head. I was about to turn back to camp when I noticed something else. The temperature had dropped. Significantly. My breath formed clouds in front of my face, though it had been mild just minutes before, and there was a smell in the air now. Acrid and sharp. It took me a moment to place it. Gunpowder. That's when I saw the fog. It emerged from Rock Creek like a living thing. Not the natural mist you'd expect on a cool night near water, but something thicker, more purposeful. It rolled across the ground in tendrils, white-gray in the darkness, moving against the wind, or rather, moving despite the complete absence of wind. I remembered Henry's warning, stay away from the fog. But I was already far from camp, and the fog was spreading fast. It reached my boots, swirling around my ankles. The temperature continued to drop until my hands ached with cold. The smell of gunpowder intensified until my eyes watered. Then I heard the shots. Sharp cracks in the darkness. Musket fire. Not the muffled pop of blank rounds we used in reenactments, but the real thing. The deadly bark of loaded weapons firing at living targets. The sounds came from all around me. Dozens of them, overlapping into a continuous roar. Voices shouted commands I couldn't quite make out. Men screaming. Orders being given. The ground seemed to shake beneath my feet, though I knew that was impossible. The fog rose to my waist now, then my chest. I could barely see 3 feet in front of me. Dark shapes moved through the mist, running past me. Not quite solid, not quite transparent. Human-shaped silhouettes that stumbled and fell, that clutched at wounds I couldn't see. I tried to back away, to return to camp, but I'd lost my bearings. The fog had disoriented me completely. Which way was the fire? Where were the tents? I spun around, panic rising in my throat. A figure ran directly at me through the fog. I raised my rifle instinctively, and it passed through me like I wasn't there, or like it wasn't there, and I felt a cold so intense it burned. My lungs seized. For a moment I couldn't breathe at all. More shapes now, everywhere. Men fighting, falling, dying. I heard the wet sound of bayonets entering flesh. The screams of the wounded begging for water, for their mothers, for God to make it stop. The fog pressed in on all sides, suffocating, relentless. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't respond properly. The cold had seeped into my bones. Another figure emerged directly in front of me, more solid than the others. A soldier in Confederate gray, his face partially blown away by a musket ball, reaching toward me with hands that were missing fingers. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Then something hit me in the stomach. Not a bullet. Or maybe it was a bullet. One fired 154 years ago, still echoing through time. The impact was real enough. It doubled me over, drove the air from my lungs. I fell backward onto the ground, clutching my midsection, certain I was bleeding out though I couldn't see any wound. The pain was extraordinary. It radiated from my stomach through my entire body, sharp and burning and wrong. I tried to call for help but could only manage a strangled gasp. The fog pressed down on me like a physical weight. The sounds of battle continued. Screaming, shooting, dying. I lay there staring up at the fog-obscured sky, convinced I was about to die on the same ground where so many others had died before me. Time stretched and compressed. Minutes felt like hours. The pain in my stomach pulsed with my heartbeat. Eventually, I realized I could no longer hear the battle sounds. The fog had begun to thin slightly, but I still couldn't move. Every attempt to sit up sent fresh waves of agony through my core. I managed to roll onto my side, then to my hands and knees, crawling blindly through the dissipating fog. I must have passed out. The next thing I remember was opening my eyes to find the fog almost completely gone, retreating back toward Rock Creek in those same unnatural tendrils. And I saw our campfire in the distance, a blessed point of light in the darkness. I tried to crawl toward the fire, but the pain prevented me from moving more than a few feet. I lay there on the cold ground, watching the fog pull back like a tide receding. That's when I heard footsteps running toward me. Jesus Christ. It was Greg's voice. Strong hands grabbed me under my arms, dragging me away from where the fog had been. What the hell were you thinking? He pulled me all the way back to camp and propped me against a tree near the fire. Walter emerged from his tent. Then Leonard. Then Henry. They all stared at me with a mixture of concern and something else. Recognition, maybe, like they'd seen this before. I had to take a leak, Greg explained to the others. Noticed he was gone. Saw a break in the mist and ran for it. Found him lying by the 6th Wisconsin Monument. Did you go into the fog? Henry asked me directly, crouching down to my level. I nodded, unable to speak yet. My teeth were chattering from cold and shock. Damn it. Henry ran a hand through his hair. I told you not to. I specifically told you. What happened? Walter asked, his usual jovial tone completely absent. I tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled. The shadow by the monument, the fog, the sounds of battle, the soldier with half his face missing, being hit, the pain. They listened without interrupting. When I finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Greg threw another log on the fire, and we all watched the flames grow. We've all had experiences here, Walter finally said. Every single one of us. Different details, but the same basic thing. The fog comes out of Rock Creek, and you see what happened here. Feel it. The battlefield shows you what it was like. It's not just here, Henry added. Other battlefields too. Antietam, Shiloh, Chancellorsville. Places where the dying was particularly horrible. Something remains. Some echo of all that violence and terror. Most people never experience it. But when you do, he gestured at me, it changes you. Makes it real in a way no book or documentary ever could. Why didn't you tell me? I asked Greg, anger cutting through my fear. You knew this could happen. Would you have believed me if I'd told you before? He countered. Would you have come? He was right, of course. I would have thought he was crazy or messing with me. The fog never came closer to our camp. It lingered near Rock Creek, visible in the pre-dawn darkness but keeping its distance. We sat by the fire, not talking much, just being together. Henry told me about watching a man die in Afghanistan, holding pressure on a wound that was too big to stop bleeding, feeling life slip away under his hands. He said what happened in the fog reminded him of that helplessness, that proximity to death. As the sun finally began to rise, painting the eastern sky with pink and gold, the fog dissipated completely. The pain in my stomach had faded to a dull ache, though when I lifted my shirt I could see a massive bruise forming, dark purple and tender to the touch. No wound, no blood, but the mark remained. The rest of the weekend passed without incident. Tourists came through, asked questions about our uniforms and equipment, watched us demonstrate military drills. Children petted the period-correct haversacks and laughed at our accents. It was educational and fun. Exactly what we'd come to do. But I couldn't stop thinking about that night. None of us could. During our free moments when tourists weren't around, we'd glance toward Rock Creek, toward Spangler Spring, remembering. On Sunday afternoon as we packed up camp, the park ranger stopped by again. He noticed I was moving stiffly, favoring my stomach. You all right, son? He asked. Took a fall in the dark, I lied. Just bruised. He looked at me for a long moment, then at the other men, then toward the creek. Yeah, he said quietly. That happens here sometimes. You be careful here. The drive home was quieter than the drive there. Greg didn't tell stories. We just drove, each lost in our own thoughts. When he finally dropped me off at my house, he turned to me before I got out of the truck. You going to keep reenacting? He asked. I thought about it. Thought about the terror I'd felt in that fog. The pain, the certainty that I was going to die. Thought about what Henry had said about the battlefield, remembering. Yeah, I said. I am. He nodded, satisfied. Good. Someone needs to remember them. All those boys who died here. Someone needs to keep their memory alive. Years have passed since that night at Spangler Spring. I'm older now, and I've been to many other battlefields, many other reenactments. I never experienced anything like that fog again, though I've heard stories from other reenactors, shared them around campfires, comparing details, trying to understand. I still can't fully explain what happened that night. I don't know if I saw actual ghosts, or if the battlefield somehow imprinted those events so strongly that they replay for certain people under certain conditions. I'm not sure it matters which explanation is correct. What I do know is this. Those boys who fought at Gettysburg, who died in agony on that ground, were real. Their suffering was real. And something of them remains at Spangler Spring, in the fog that rises from Rock Creek, in the spring that once ran red with their blood. People visit Gettysburg as tourists, take photos in front of monuments, treat it like any other historical site. But it's not. It's a place of tremendous death and pain, where teenagers my age when I had that experience fought and killed each other over issues that seemed worth dying for at the time. The battlefield remembers. It will always remember. And now so do I. I carry that bruise with me still, not on my skin anymore but deeper, somewhere in my chest where I remember what fear truly feels like. Where I understand, in a way most people never will, that those monuments aren't just stones. They mark places where real people suffered and died, where blood soaked into soil that doesn't forget. If you ever visit Gettysburg, if you ever find yourself near Spangler Spring as darkness falls, pay attention. Notice if fog starts to rise from Rock Creek. And if it does, if you see those unnatural tendrils reaching across the battlefield, take my advice, stay away. Some history isn't meant to be experienced firsthand. Some memories are too terrible to relive. The battlefield may show you what happened there, and God help you if it does, because you'll carry that weight for the rest of your life. I know I will. The house felt wrong from the moment I signed the papers at the end of May. Not wrong in any way I could articulate to the real estate agent, or even to my wife, but wrong in the way your skin crawls when you walk through a cemetery at dusk, or the way your stomach drops when you hear footsteps in an empty house. It was a decent place. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a wraparound porch that had sold my wife on the spot. The price was right, almost suspiciously so for a house this size in decent condition. But I'd learned not to look gift horses in the mouth, especially when the mortgage payments would be manageable and we'd finally have space for the family we'd been planning. The moving truck had barely pulled away when the first incident happened. I was unpacking boxes in the living room when I heard what sounded like fingernails dragging slowly across the wooden floorboards upstairs. Long, deliberate scratches that made my teeth ache. When I called up to my wife, she was in the kitchen, nowhere near the bedrooms. When I investigated, I found nothing but dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Old house settling, I told myself, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. The incidents escalated over the following weeks. Shadows that moved independently of their sources. The sound of whispered conversations in empty rooms that stopped the moment you tried to listen. Doors that stood open in the morning despite being locked the night before. My wife began sleeping poorly, tossing and turning, muttering about dreams she couldn't remember but that left her drained and hollow-eyed. The worst was the basement. Every time I went down there, the temperature dropped at least 20 degrees, and I could swear I heard something breathing in the corners where the light didn't reach. The furnace would kick on at random times, sending clanging sounds through the pipes that sounded almost like Morse code. When I mentioned it to my wife, she just stared at me with eyes that seemed too wide, too frightened, and asked if we could avoid talking about the basement. I started keeping a journal, documenting each incident with the methodical precision of a scientist, as if recording the events might somehow make them less real. The scratching sounds came most nights around 2:17 a.m. The whispers were always in a language I couldn't identify, but somehow understood to be ancient, older than the house, older than the town. The shadows grew longer and more aggressive as the weeks passed, reaching toward us like grasping fingers. By August, I was ready to talk to someone about it. Not a priest or a psychic. I wasn't ready for that level of admission. But maybe a friend who might have some perspective. Someone rational, who could help me understand what was happening, or at least confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. T was the obvious choice. We'd been friends since college, and he approached everything with the kind of skeptical, scientific mindset that I respected. He was the type who'd debunk ghost stories for fun, who'd spent his honeymoon visiting supposedly haunted locations just to prove they were nothing more than old buildings and overactive imaginations. If anyone could help me get to the bottom of this, it would be him. When I called him that evening in early August, his voice was warm with familiarity. "Haven't heard from you since you moved into that place. How's domestic life treating you?" "That's actually why I'm calling," I said, glancing toward the stairs where I'd heard those scratching sounds the night before. "I was wondering if you and your wife might want to come visit, see the new place." "Of course, we'd love to. This weekend work?" "Perfect." I hesitated, then added, "There's something I want to run by you. Some weird stuff has been happening." I could hear the grin in his voice. "Weird stuff? You mean like the house is haunted?" He laughed, and the sound was so normal, so reassuring, that I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. "Something like that." "Oh, this is going to be fun. You know how much I love a good ghost story. Don't worry, I'll bring my EMF detector and we'll get to the bottom of your poltergeist problem." After we hung up, I felt better than I had in weeks. Trudy would help me figure this out. He'd bring his instruments and his rational explanations, and we'd discover that the house had settling issues, or maybe a pest problem that was causing the sounds. The shadows were just tricks of light, the whispers were just the wind through old window frames. But even as I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness beyond the windows. The grain elevator across the street loomed against the night sky like a monument to something ancient and hungry. I'd noticed it the first day we moved in, a hulking concrete structure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. During the day, it looked like any other grain elevator, functional and unremarkable, but at night it transformed into something else entirely. The building seemed to breathe in the darkness, its silhouette shifting and changing when I wasn't looking directly at it. Sometimes I could swear I saw movement around its base, shadows that moved with purpose and intelligence. The railroad tracks that led to it gleamed dully in the moonlight, like a path leading to somewhere no sane person would want to go. My wife had commented on it too, though she tried to make light of it. "That old elevator gives me the creeps," she'd said one evening as we stood on the porch watching the sunset. "There's something about it that just feels wrong." I'd agreed, but I hadn't told her about the dreams I'd been having. Dreams where I walked across the street in the dead of night, drawn by a sound I couldn't identify but somehow recognized. Dreams where I stood at the base of the grain elevator and looked up to see something looking back down at me from impossible heights. Dreams where I heard my name called in a voice that was familiar but couldn't be human. The night before T's visit, I stood at the bedroom window staring at the elevator. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light, and I could have sworn I saw something moving near the base of the structure. A shape that was too tall and too thin to be human, but moved with unmistakable intelligence. I blinked, and it was gone. "Just shadows," I whispered to myself, but my hands were shaking as I pulled the curtains closed. The next evening, as I watched T's headlights turn into our driveway, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that rational help was arriving, but apprehension about what that help might uncover. Because deep down, in a part of my mind I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew that whatever was happening in our house was connected to that grain elevator across the street. And I had a terrible feeling that T's visit was going to prove that some things are better left unexplored. Ty arrived at sunset with his wife, and a small black bag that I assumed contained his ghost hunting equipment. He looked exactly as I remembered. Tall and lean, with the kind of confident bearing that came from years of debunking the supernatural. His wife smiled warmly as they approached the porch, but I noticed she kept glancing toward the grain elevator across the street. "So this is the haunted house," Ty said with a grin, setting his bag down on the porch. "Looks pretty normal to me." "Wait until you've been here a while," my wife said, and there was something in her tone that made T's expression grow more serious. We spent the first hour inside, talking and catching up while I recounted the incidents we'd experienced. Ty listened with the kind of focused attention I'd hoped for, occasionally asking questions about timing and frequency. He pulled out a small digital recorder and what looked like a temperature gun, taking readings in various rooms. "The basement definitely runs cold," he admitted after taking measurements downstairs. "But that's not unusual for a house this age. The foundation might not be properly insulated." "What about the scratching sounds?" I asked. "Could be mice in the walls or the house settling. These old places make all kinds of noises." But I noticed he didn't sound entirely convinced. As darkness fell, we moved outside to the front yard. The grain elevator loomed across the street, its bulk blocking out stars. Under the street light, it looked massive and oppressive, like a sleeping giant that might wake at any moment. "That thing is pretty intimidating," T's wife said, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm evening. "It's been bothering me since we moved in," I said. "There's something about it that feels off." T studied the structure with the same analytical gaze he'd used inside the house. "It's old, probably been there since the 1920s or 30s. These grain elevators were built to last, but they're not exactly pretty. I can see why it might seem creepy in the dark." That's when I told him about the shadows I'd seen moving around its base, the way it seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at it. T listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful. "You know what?" he said finally. "Why don't I take a walk over there? Get a closer look. Maybe there's something about the structure that's creating optical illusions." "I don't think that's a good idea," my wife said quickly. "Not alone. I'll be fine. I'll just take a quick look around the perimeter, see if there's anything that might explain what you've been seeing." He pulled a heavy flashlight from his bag and tested it. The beam was strong and steady, cutting through the darkness like a blade. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, but T was already walking toward the street. "Be right back," he called over his shoulder. This is exactly the kind of thing that usually has a perfectly rational explanation. We watched him cross the street, his flashlight beam dancing ahead of him. The grain elevator seemed to swallow the light, making it look smaller and more fragile than it should have, disappeared around the corner of the building, and for a few minutes we could see the glow of his flashlight moving along the structure's base. "He's been gone a while," T's wife said, checking her watch. It was just after 10 p.m. "Give him a few more minutes," I said, but I was starting to feel uneasy. The night seemed unusually quiet, as if even the insects had stopped their chirping. Then we saw the flashlight beam stop moving. It stayed pointed at one spot for what felt like an eternity, perfectly still. Then it began to shake, barely perceptible at first, but growing more violent. "Something's wrong," my wife whispered. The flashlight beam suddenly swung wildly, cutting chaotic patterns through the darkness. We could hear T's voice, though we couldn't make out the words. He sounded frightened, confused. Then the light went out. We called his name, but there was no response. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then we saw a figure emerge from around the corner of the grain elevator, walking slowly back toward us. It was T, but something was wrong with his gait. He moved like a man in shock, his steps uneven and hesitant. As he got closer, I could see his face in the streetlight, and my blood ran cold. He was pale, deathly pale, with a sheen of sweat that made his skin look waxy. His eyes were wide and unfocused, and he was breathing in short, sharp gasps. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped his flashlight. "T," his wife called, running toward him. "What happened? Are you okay?" He stopped in the middle of the street, swaying slightly. When he looked at us, his eyes held an expression I'd never seen before, pure primal terror. "I saw," he began, then stopped, shaking his head. "I saw something that shouldn't exist." We helped him to the porch, where he collapsed into a chair. His wife sat beside him, holding his shaking hands while I fetched him a glass of water. He drank it greedily, as if he'd been wandering in the desert. "Tell us what happened," I said gently. Ty looked toward the grain elevator, then quickly looked away. I was walking around the perimeter, just like I said. Nothing unusual at first. Then I reached the far corner, the one that faces away from the road. He paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. I was shining my light along the base of the building when I saw movement, something in my peripheral vision. What kind of movement? His wife asked. I thought it was just a shadow at first, but then I looked up, and I saw. He stopped, his breathing becoming more rapid. I saw a hand, a human hand, but wrong, all wrong. Wrong how? I pressed. It was huge, longer than any human hand should be, with fingers that seemed to go on forever. And it was so pale it was almost white, like bone, like it had never seen sunlight. He looked at his own hands, as if comparing them to what he'd seen. The fingers were moving, flexing, like it was testing its grip on something. Where was it? My wife asked. That's the impossible part. It was reaching around the corner of the building, but it was 8 or 9 feet off the ground, maybe higher. And the arm, he shuddered. The arm was so long, impossibly long. It just kept coming, reaching around the corner like it was attached to something massive. His wife squeezed his hand. Maybe it was just a shadow, or a trick of the light. No. His voice was firm. I know what I saw. When I shined my flashlight directly at it, I could see every detail. The texture of the skin, the way the bones pressed against it, the fingernails. He closed his eyes, as if trying to block out the memory. The fingernails were long and yellow, like claws, and they were moving, scratching against the concrete. What happened then? I asked. It saw the light. The hand stopped moving and turned toward me. Not the whole hand, but the fingers. They bent in directions that fingers shouldn't bend, like they were trying to look at me. And then it was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there at all. The 4 of us sat in silence, processing what T had described. This was the man who'd spent years debunking ghost stories, who approached every supernatural claim with scientific skepticism, and now he was describing something that couldn't possibly exist. 2, I said carefully. You've investigated hundreds of paranormal claims. You've never seen anything like this before? He shook his head. Never. And I've wanted to. Part of me has always hoped I'd encounter something genuinely unexplainable. But this, he gestured toward the grain elevator. This is different. This is real, and it's wrong, and it shouldn't exist. But you said it disappeared when you shined the light on it, his wife pointed out. Doesn't that suggest it might have been an illusion? No, Tut said firmly. It didn't disappear because the light dispelled it. It disappeared because it chose to, because it realized it had been seen. He looked at each of us in turn. Whatever that thing was, it was intelligent. It knew I was there, and it knew I could see it. As if summoned by his words, a sound drifted across the street from the grain elevator. It was subtle, barely audible, but unmistakably the sound of something moving, something large, shifting its weight against concrete. We all heard it. We all looked toward the grain elevator, and in the darkness around its base I could swear I saw something moving. We need to go inside, my wife said, her voice tight with fear. But it was already standing, his scientific curiosity overcoming his terror. No, I need to see it again. I need to know what we're dealing with. T. No, his wife pleaded. You're in shock. You need to rest. But I understood his compulsion. The rational part of my mind was screaming that we should go inside, lock the doors, and pretend this wasn't happening. But the part of me that had been living with the unexplained for months knew that ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. I'll go with you, I said, standing beside him. Till looked at me with gratitude, and something that might have been relief. Thank you. I don't think I can face it alone again. Our wives protested, but we were already walking toward the street. Behind us, I could hear them following, their footsteps reluctant but determined. As we crossed the street, the grain elevator seemed to grow larger, more imposing. The darkness around its base was absolute, untouched by the distant streetlights, and somewhere in that darkness, something was waiting. The 4 of us stood at the edge of the grain elevator's shadow, our flashlights creating a small circle of light in the overwhelming darkness. The concrete structure loomed above us, its surface rough and stained with decades of weather and neglect. Up close it was even more imposing. like standing at the base of a massive tombstone. "Stay close," T whispered, his voice barely audible. "And keep your lights moving. Don't let any one area stay dark for too long." We began walking slowly around the perimeter, our footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The sound seemed to be absorbed by the structure itself, creating a muffled, claustrophobic effect. The railroad tracks stretched away into the darkness on one side, their steel rails gleaming dully in our flashlight beams. "There," Ty said suddenly, pointing toward the far corner. "That's where I saw it." We approached cautiously, our lights scanning the area where Ta had encountered the impossible hand. The concrete was unmarked, showing no signs of the scratching Ta had described, but there was something else, a smell that hadn't been there before. "Do you smell that?" my wife asked, covering her nose with her hand. It was a sickly sweet odor, like flowers left too long in stagnant water, but underneath it was something else, something that made my stomach clench with primitive disgust. It was the smell of decay, of something that had been dead for a very long time. "It's stronger here," T said, his voice muffled by the hand he'd pressed over his mouth and nose. Whatever that thing was, it left a scent. We continued around the building, our flashlights sweeping back and forth across the concrete. The smell grew stronger as we moved, and with it came a feeling of being watched. Not the casual observation of curious neighbors, but the focused attention of a predator studying its prey. "There," I said, stopping suddenly. "Did you see that?" My flashlight beam had caught something at the edge of its range. A quick movement like someone ducking behind the building. But when I focused the light on the spot, there was nothing there. "I saw it too," T's wife whispered. Something moved. We stood frozen, our lights trained on the corner where the movement had been. The silence was absolute, but it felt expectant, like the pause before thunder. Then slowly, a shape began to emerge from around the corner. It wasn't the hand T had described. This was something else entirely. A head, or what might have been a head, peered around the concrete corner about 7 feet off the ground. It was pale, almost luminescent in the darkness, with features that were human but wrong. The proportions were off, stretched and elongated like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. The eyes were too large, too dark, and they were fixed on us with an intelligence that was clearly inhuman. "Jesus Christ," T breathed. The thing, I couldn't think of it as anything else, studied us for a long moment. Its head tilted slightly, like a bird examining something interesting, and I could see its mouth moving, not speaking but working, as if it was tasting our scent on the air. Then it was gone, vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. "Did everyone see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "We all saw it," my wife said. "We all saw the same thing. But he was already moving, following the railroad tracks that led away from the grain elevator. It's still here," he said. "I can feel it watching us." We followed him reluctantly, our flashlights creating a bubble of light in the oppressive darkness. The tracks stretched ahead of us, disappearing into the night like a path to nowhere. On either side, tall grass rustled in a breeze that didn't seem to touch us. "Listen," T said suddenly. We stopped, straining to hear over the sound of our own breathing. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, matching our pace. But they were coming from behind us, and when we turned our lights in that direction, there was nothing there. "It's following us," T's wife said, her voice tight with fear. "No," T said. "It's hurting us. Look." He pointed his flashlight ahead, and I saw what he meant. The tracks curved ahead of us, leading away from the road and deeper into the darkness. If we continued following them, we'd be moving away from help, away from the safety of lights and civilization. "We need to go back," I said. But when we turned around, the footsteps stopped. And in the silence that followed, I could hear something else breathing, deep, rasping breaths that seemed to come from all around us. "Stay together," T said, "and keep moving. Don't stop, no matter what you hear." We began walking back toward the grain elevator, but the footsteps resumed, matching our pace exactly. Stop and they stopped. Speed up and they sped up. It was like being stalked by our own shadow. "There," my wife said, pointing to a spot about 10 feet to our left. "The air is different there." She was right. I could see it now. A patch of air that seemed denser, darker than the surrounding night. And it was cold. Even from a distance, I could feel the chill radiating from it. Cold spots, T said. Classic paranormal phenomenon. The entity is drawing energy from the environment. Entity? His wife asked. Whatever this thing is, it's not human. Not anymore, if it ever was. We encountered more cold spots as we walked, each one accompanied by the feeling of being watched. The temperature would drop suddenly, 10 or 15 degrees, and we'd find ourselves covered in goosebumps despite the warm night. The cold seemed to seep into our bones, leaving us shivering long after we'd passed through the affected area. I felt something, my wife said suddenly, stopping and examining her hand. Something touched me. I shined my flashlight on her hand, but there was nothing to see. No marks, no signs of contact, but her expression was one of deep revulsion, as if she'd been touched by something unspeakably filthy. It was cold, she said, and soft, like dead skin. We hurried back toward the grain elevator, but the experiences followed us. More cold spots, more sounds of footsteps and breathing, and always the feeling of being watched by something that shouldn't exist. We need to get our wives out of here, I said to T as we reached the relative safety of the streetlight. Agreed, he said, but I need to know what we're dealing with. This isn't just a haunting, this is something active, something that's aware of us. We walked the women back to the house, constantly looking over our shoulders. The grain elevator seemed to watch us go, its dark bulk radiating menace. At the front door, T's wife stopped and turned back. It's still there, she said. I can feel it watching us. She was right. Even from the safety of the porch, I could sense the thing's attention like a physical weight. It was studying us, learning about us, planning something. We should call the police, my wife said as we went inside. And tell them what? Ty asked. That we saw a monster behind the grain elevator? They'd think we were drunk or crazy. Maybe we are crazy, his wife said. Maybe we're all having some kind of shared delusion. But I knew she didn't believe that. None of us did. What we'd experienced was too real, too consistent. We'd all seen the same things, felt the same cold spots, heard the same impossible sounds. I need to research this, I said. Find out if anyone else has reported similar sightings. Research what, exactly? T asked. I hesitated, then pulled out my phone and began searching for images. You said the hand was pale and elongated, with long fingers. And that head we saw, it was human but wrong. Those are classic descriptions of certain creatures. Creatures? T's wife asked. Wendigo, I said, showing them the first image I'd found. Or skinwalker. Native American legends about creatures that were once human but became something else. Something hungry. Studied the image on my phone, his face growing pale. That's exactly what I saw. The proportions. The way the fingers were positioned. How is that possible? I don't know, I said, but look at this. I showed him another image, this one depicting a Wendigo's head. Does this look familiar? T's hands began to shake as he stared at the screen. That's it? That's exactly what looked around the corner at us. How could I see something that matches centuries-old legends? Maybe the legends are based on real encounters, my wife suggested. Maybe these things actually exist. But here, Enid's wife asked. In Washington state, these are supposed to be from the Great Lakes region or the northern forests. Not necessarily, I said, continuing to search. There are reports from all over the country, and I paused, reading something that made my blood run cold. There was a massacre site about 510 miles from here, a battlefield where hundreds of Native Americans were killed in the 1800s. What does that have to do with anything? Tot asked. According to the legends, Wendigo and skinwalkers are created by extreme trauma, starvation, or violence. They're born from human suffering and desperation. If something that traumatic happened nearby. I didn't need to finish the sentence. We all understood the implication. We were dealing with something that had been human once, but had been transformed by unimaginable horror into something else entirely. We need to see it again, Tess said suddenly. We need to confirm what we're dealing with. Are you insane? His wife asked. After what we just experienced? I have to know, Tu said. I've spent my entire adult life debunking this kind of thing. But if it's real, if these creatures actually exist, then everything I thought I knew about the world is wrong. I understood his compulsion. We'd crossed a line tonight, moved from the realm of the explainable into something far more dangerous, but there was no going back. We'd seen too much, experienced too much to simply pretend it hadn't happened. One more time, I said. But if we see it again, we're done. We pack up and leave town. Tinny nodded. One more time. As we prepared to leave the house again, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face was pale and drawn, my eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. But there was something else there too, a morbid fascination, a need to understand what we were dealing with. Behind me, I could see the grain elevator through the window, its dark bulk waiting in the night. And somewhere in that darkness, something inhuman was waiting for us to return. The worst part was that I knew we would return. Despite every rational instinct screaming at us to run, we would walk back into that darkness and face whatever was waiting there. Because now that we knew it existed, we couldn't simply ignore it. We left our wives at the house despite their protests. This time it was just T and me, walking across the empty street toward the grain elevator. The night seemed darker than before, as if the street lights had dimmed in response to our presence. Our flashlights felt inadequate against the pressing darkness, like candles in a hurricane. I keep thinking about what you said, T said as we approached the building. About the massacre site. About trauma creating these things. What about it? If that's true, then this creature isn't just some random monster. It's the product of human suffering. It was created by pain and death and desperation. He paused, studying the grain elevator's imposing silhouette. That makes it more dangerous, doesn't it? More personal. I hadn't considered that perspective, but he was right. If the Wendigo legends were accurate, then we weren't dealing with some mindless beast. We were facing something that had once been human, something that had been transformed by trauma so severe it had stripped away everything that made it human. Stay alert, I said as we rounded the corner where T had first seen the hand. And if you see anything at all, don't hesitate to run. The smell hit us immediately. That sickly sweet odor of decay, but stronger now, more concentrated. It was as if the creature had been here recently, leaving its scent like a territorial marking. It's been here, T said, covering his nose. Recently. We moved slowly along the building's perimeter, our flashlights sweeping back and forth. The concrete surface was unmarked, but I could swear I saw impressions in the dirt at the base of the structure. They were too large to be human footprints, and they were spaced too far apart, as if whatever had made them had an impossibly long stride. 2, I said, stopping suddenly. Look at this. My flashlight beam was fixed on a section of the concrete wall about 8 feet off the ground. There, scratched into the surface, were deep gouges that looked like claw marks. They were fresh, the concrete dust still bright against the darker surface. Those weren't there before, Ty said, his voice tight with fear. I would have noticed them. The scratches were arranged in groups of 4, like the marks a massive hand might make while gripping the wall. They were deep, too deep for any human to have made, and they extended down the wall in a pattern that suggested something had been climbing. It can climb, I said. It's not limited to ground level. That realization made the grain elevator seem even more threatening. If the creature could climb, then it could reach any height on the building. It could be above us right now, looking down, waiting for the right moment to strike. We should go, Ty said, but his voice lacked conviction. The same morbid fascination that had driven us out here was keeping us rooted in place. That's when we heard it, a sound that froze the blood in our veins. It was a voice, but not quite human. The words were in English, but the tone was wrong, as if the speaker's vocal cords had been designed for an entirely different purpose. Why do you come here? The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the concrete walls until it was impossible to determine its source. It was low and rasping, like someone speaking through a throat full of gravel. Did you hear that? T whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. The voice had been directed at us, personally. The creature knew we were here, and it was capable of communication. You smell of fear, the voice continued. Sweet fear, warm fear. It's playing with us, T said, like a cat with mice. The voice laughed, a sound that was somehow worse than the words. It was a broken, hollow sound, like wind through a tomb. Not playing, hunting. Suddenly the temperature dropped. Not gradually, but all at once, as if we'd stepped into a freezer. Our breath began to mist, and I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms despite the warm night. Cold spot, T said unnecessarily. It's close. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving along the wall above us. It was huge, at least 9 feet tall, and it moved with a fluid grace that was terrifying to behold. The shadow seemed to ripple and flow as if it wasn't quite solid. There, I said, pointing upward. Ta followed my gaze, and his flashlight beam caught something that made him cry out in terror. High on the wall, about 15 feet off the ground, was a single eye. It was yellow, the color of old bone, and it was the size of a dinner plate. The pupil was black and elongated, like a cat's eye, and it was fixed on us with predatory intensity. It sees us, Taika said, his voice breaking. It's watching us. The eye blinked, a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to take forever. When it opened again, it had moved. Not physically, but its attention had shifted. It was no longer just watching us, it was studying us, cataloging our weaknesses, planning its attack. We need to go, I said, backing away from the wall. Now. But was frozen, staring up at the eye with a mixture of terror and fascination. How is this possible? He whispered. How can something like this exist? The eye blinked again, and this time I could have sworn I saw it smile. Not the eye itself, but something around it. Some suggestion of a mouth stretching into an impossible grin. Ton, I grabbed his arm. We're leaving. Now. He blinked, seeming to come out of a trance, and nodded. We backed away from the wall, our flashlights trained on the spot where the eye had been. But it was gone, vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Where did it go? Tot asked. That's when we heard the footsteps. Not the slow, measured steps we'd heard before, but rapid, urgent movement. Something was running along the top of the grain elevator, keeping pace with us as we moved away from the building. It's following us, I said. We broke into a run, our flashlights bobbing wildly as we fled toward the street. Behind us, I could hear the creature keeping pace, its footsteps echoing off the concrete like gunshots. But when I looked back, I saw nothing but darkness. We reached the street and kept running, not stopping until we were safely on my porch. Only then did we turn around to look back at the grain elevator. The building stood silhouetted against the night sky, dark and imposing, but there was something different about it now. The shadows around its base seemed deeper, more substantial, and high up on the wall, I could swear I saw a pale shape moving. It's still there, T said, his voice shaking. It's still watching us. We went inside, locking the door behind us. Our wives were waiting in the living room, their faces pale with worry. What happened? My wife asked. We heard you running. I told them about the eye, about the voice, about the creature that had followed us. Tari sat beside his wife, his hands shaking as he tried to process what we'd experienced. It spoke to us, he said finally. It knew we were there, and it spoke to us. That's not just some mindless beast. That's something intelligent, something that understands human psychology. What did it say? His wife asked. It said it was hunting us, I replied. It said we smelled of fear. The four of us sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. What we'd experienced had moved beyond the realm of the supernatural into something far more dangerous. We weren't just dealing with a haunting or a poltergeist. We were dealing with an intelligent predator that had marked us as prey. We need to leave, my wife said finally. Pack up tonight and leave. Go to a hotel or stay with friends. Anywhere but here. And go where? I asked. How do we know it won't follow us? Because it's tied to this place, T said, to the grain elevator. These creatures are usually territorial. They don't venture far from their hunting grounds. Usually? His wife asked. According to the legends, T said. But then again, according to the legends, these things shouldn't exist at all. As if summoned by his words, a sound drifted through the windows. A long, mournful wail that seemed to come from the grain elevator itself. It was a sound of loss and longing, of hunger that could never be satisfied. It's calling to us, Ty said. It wants us to come back. Well, we're not going, his wife said firmly. We're done with this insanity. But even as she spoke, I could feel the creature's pull. There was something about its call that resonated in my bones, a sound that spoke to some primitive part of my brain. It was the call of the hunt, the song of the predator. And despite every rational thought screaming at me to run, part of me wanted to answer that call. We can't leave it like this, I said. We need to know what it wants, why it chose us. You're talking about going back out there, my wife said, after what you just experienced. I have to. Don't you see? This thing has been affecting our lives for months. The sounds in the house, the shadows, the feeling of being watched. It's all connected to that creature. Until we understand what it wants, we'll never be safe. Ty looked at me with something that might have been respect. You're right. We can't just run away and hope it loses interest. We need to confront it. Are you both insane? His wife asked. That thing could have killed you out there. It probably wanted to kill you. Maybe, T said. But it didn't. It had opportunities, but it didn't attack. It's playing with us, yes, but it's also trying to communicate. Maybe it wants something from us. Like what? My wife asked. I thought about the massacre site, about the trauma that had supposedly created these creatures. Maybe it wants us to understand. Maybe it wants us to know what happened to it. So what are you suggesting? Tay asked. One more time. We go back out there, but this time we don't run. We listen. We try to understand what it's trying to tell us. The others stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But I knew that we'd crossed a line tonight, moved from the world of the rational into something far more dangerous. And the only way forward was to face that danger head on. If we do this, T said slowly, we do it together. All of us. No more splitting up. Absolutely not, his wife said. I'm not going back out there. Neither am I, my wife said. This is madness. But I could see in T's eyes that he understood. We'd seen something that shouldn't exist. Encountered a creature that challenged everything we thought we knew about reality. And now that we knew it was real, we couldn't simply pretend it wasn't. Then it's just us, I said to T one more time. He nodded. One more time. As we prepared to leave the house again, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face was pale and drawn, my eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. Behind me, through the window, I could see the grain elevator waiting in the darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, something inhuman was waiting for us to return. The third time we approached the grain elevator, the night itself seemed to recoil from our presence. The streetlights flickered as we passed beneath them, and the air grew thick and oppressive, as if we were walking through invisible cobwebs. Our flashlights seemed dimmer, their beams swallowed by a darkness that felt alive and hungry. It knows we're coming, T said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's been waiting for us. He was right. The grain elevator stood before us like a monument to something ancient and terrible, its concrete surface seeming to pulse with malevolent life. The shadows around its base were deeper now, more substantial, and they moved with purpose and intelligence. Remember, I said, we're not here to run this time. We're here to understand. T nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We both knew that what we were about to do was beyond dangerous. It was potentially suicidal, but we also knew that we couldn't live with the questions, couldn't go on pretending that what we'd experienced wasn't real. As we approached the building, the temperature began to drop. Not gradually, but in waves, as if the creature was testing our resolve. Our breath began to mist, and I could feel the cold seeping into my bones despite the warm night. It's here, T said unnecessarily. The smell hit us next, that sickly sweet odor of decay, but stronger now, almost overwhelming. It was the smell of something that had been dead for a very long time, something that had been preserved by unnatural means. Can you hear that? I asked. Beneath the silence there was a sound, a rhythmic tapping like fingernails against concrete. It was coming from above us, from somewhere high on the grain elevator's wall. It's up there, T said, pointing his flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught something that made us both gasp. High on the wall, at least 20 feet off the ground, was a figure. It was humanoid in shape but wrong in every proportion. Its limbs were too long, its torso too thin, its head too large for its skeletal frame. It was pale, almost luminescent, and it moved with a fluid grace that was terrifying to behold. That's it, T whispered. That's what I saw. The creature stopped its tapping and turned toward us. Even from this distance I could see its eyes, those terrible yellow eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. It studied us for a long moment, its head tilted at an impossible angle. Then it spoke. "You returned," it said, its voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Good. We have much to..." The creature began to climb down the wall, its movements spider-like and unnatural. Its fingers found purchase in cracks and crevices that shouldn't have been able to support its weight, and it descended with a grace that defied physics. "Don't run," I said to T, though every instinct was screaming at me to flee. "We need to hear what it has to say." The creature reached the ground and stood before us, its full height revealed. It was at least 9 feet tall, maybe more, with limbs that seemed to stretch on forever. Its skin was pale and translucent, revealing the dark network of veins beneath. Its face was human in basic structure but wrong in every detail. The eyes too large, the mouth too wide, the nose barely more than slits in the bone. "You know what I am," it said, its voice like wind through dry leaves. "You have seen the pictures, read the stories." "Wendigo," I said, the word barely audible. The creature's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. "Names are for the living. I am what remains when everything else is taken away." "What do you want from us?" T asked, his voice shaking but determined. "Want?" The creature laughed, that broken hollow sound we'd heard before. "I want nothing. I am hunger itself. I am the emptiness that can never be filled." "But you're talking to us," I said. "You're trying to communicate. That means you want something." The creature moved closer, and I could see the details of its face more clearly. The skin was stretched tight over prominent bones, and there were patches where it had worn away entirely, revealing the yellowed bone beneath. Its eyes were sunken deep in their sockets, but they burned with a terrible intelligence. "I want you to understand," it said. "I want you to know what I have become, and why." "Tell us," Tu said. "We're listening." The creature's head tilted, and for a moment it looked almost human, almost sad. "I was like you once. I had a name, a family, a life, but that was before the hunger, before the long winter when the white men came with their diseases and their bullets." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the creature's presence. "You're talking about the massacre, the battlefield." "Massacre," the creature repeated, and there was infinite sadness in its voice. "Yes, that is what they called it afterward. But it was not quick. It was slow and terrible, and we were trapped in the valley, with nowhere to run, and nothing to eat." "You starved," Till said. "We starved. And when the dead began to outnumber the living, and the children began to cry from hunger, that was when the choice was made." The creature's voice dropped to a whisper. "That was when I chose to become this thing, rather than watch them die." I felt sick, not from the creature's presence, but from the implications of what it was telling us. You ate human flesh. I ate the dead to feed the living, and in doing so I became something else. Something that could never die but could never truly live. "But that was over a century ago," Tot said. "How are you still here?" "Time means nothing to the hungry. I have walked these lands for generations, watching the world change, watching new people come and build their lives on the bones of the dead." The creature gestured toward the grain elevator behind it. "They built this place on sacred ground, ground that was watered with the blood of my people, and so I remain guardian of the dead, keeper of the memories." "Is that why you've been haunting our house?" I asked. "Because we're living on sacred ground?" "Your house sits on the path between the living and the dead. I have been trying to warn you, trying to make you understand that this place is not safe." "Warn us about what?" Todd asked. The creature's expression grew grave. "Others are coming. Others like me, but different. Hungrier, less human. The barriers between worlds grow thin, and soon, this place will be overrun with things that should not exist." "What others?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "The truly lost ones. Those who gave up their humanity completely. They smell the fear in this place, the old blood, The ancient pain, and they are coming to feed. The creature moved closer, and I could smell its breath, sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. You must leave this place. Take your families and go far from here, before the others arrive. When? Tay asked. When are they coming? Soon. The moon grows dark in 3 days. That is when the barriers will be weakest. That is when they will come. I felt a chill of absolute terror. And if we don't leave? The creature's smile was terrible to behold. Then, you will become like me, or worse. You will become like them. Why are you warning us? Tad asked. Why do you care what happens to us? Because I remember what it was like to be human, and because your fear reminds me of what I have lost. The creature's voice grew softer, more human. I do not want to see others suffer as I have suffered. For a moment we stood in silence, processing what the creature had told us. This wasn't just a monster. It was a victim, transformed by trauma and desperation into something inhuman, and it was trying to protect us from sharing its fate. We'll leave, I said finally. We'll pack up tonight and go. Good, the creature said. Go far from here, and do not return until the danger has passed. How will we know when it's safe? Ta asked.
You will know. The earth itself will tell you.
The creature began to back away, dissolving into the shadows around the grain elevator. Remember what I have told you. Remember that not all monsters choose to be what they are. Wait, I called out. What's your name? What were you called before? The creature paused, its form already becoming indistinct. Names are for the living. I am what remains when everything else is taken away. And then it was gone, vanished into the darkness as if it had never existed at all. Tew and I stood in the silence, processing what we'd experienced. We'd come here looking for answers, and we'd found them. But the answers were more terrible than we'd imagined. We need to get our families out of here, T said finally. Tonight. I nodded, unable to speak. We walked back toward the house, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Behind us, the grain elevator stood silent and imposing, but it no longer felt malevolent. It felt sad, like a monument to something that had been lost. Inside the house, we found our wives waiting anxiously. Their faces were pale with worry, and they stood as we entered. What happened? My wife asked. You were gone for over an hour. We need to pack, I said. We need to leave tonight. Leave? Why? I told them about our encounter with the creature, about its warning, about the others that were coming. They listened in stunned silence, their faces growing paler with each word. So it's trying to protect us? To wife asked. In its way, T said. It's trying to prevent us from becoming like it. But we can't just leave, my wife said. This is our home. We just moved in. It's not our home, I said. It never was. We're just visitors here, and we're not welcome. We spent the rest of the night packing our essential belongings. As dawn approached, we loaded our cars and prepared to leave. The grain elevator stood silhouetted against the morning sky, dark and imposing. But in the early light it looked different, less threatening, more sad. As we drove away, I caught sight of movement near the building's base. A pale figure stood watching us leave, its form barely visible in the dawn light. It raised one impossibly long arm, in what might have been a farewell gesture. I never saw the creature again. We moved to a city 500 miles away, and I never returned to that house. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I think about the creature that had once been human. I think about the choice it had made, the sacrifice it had endured, and the loneliness it must have felt. The house sold quickly, despite its history. The new owners seemed happy enough, though they lasted only 6 months before moving away. Since then, the house has sat empty, and according to local newspapers, the grain elevator was demolished last year. But I know the creature is still there, somewhere, still guarding the dead, still warning the living, still paying the price for a choice made in desperation over a century ago. And sometimes in my dreams, I can still hear its voice, echoing across the years. Remember that not all monsters choose to be what they are. I remember, and I understand now that the real horror wasn't the creature itself, but the circumstances that had created it. The hunger, the desperation, the impossible choices that had transformed a human being into something inhuman. We survived our encounter with the Wendigo, but I'll never forget the lesson it taught us, that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that were once just like us. Wilderness guides develop a sense for trouble. It's not something taught in training courses or written in manuals. It's a feeling that grows from years spent reading the language of the land. My name is Clay Harjo. In 2003, I was a seasoned guide in Hell's Canyon, Idaho, when that sixth sense failed me completely. Hell's Canyon isn't the kind of place you casually stroll through. It's the deepest river gorge in North America, with a reputation for swallowing up folks who wander too far from the trail. I'd been a guide for a few seasons. Not that I was looking for excitement. It just paid the bills and kept me outdoors. Being Cherokee, I figured I had a leg up in these rugged terrains. But that assumption nearly cost me more than I bargained for. I was guiding a group of hikers who'd signed up for the thrill of off-the-beaten-path trekking. A phrase that sounds great until you're out there realizing how far away beaten paths can actually feel. The group was a mix. 2 college kids looking for adventure, a quiet woman in her 40s who kept to herself, and a retired firefighter named Dale who talked nonstop about his days rescuing folks from burning buildings. Real salt-of-the-earth guy, and the way he casually bragged about fighting fires made the college kids call him Hotshot. He was the kind of guy you wanted in a bad situation, until you found yourself in a situation where his bravado couldn't help one bit. The 2 college kids, Ethan and Jessica, were constantly snapping photos with their new digital cameras. They wore matching University of Oregon sweatshirts, and had that eager enthusiasm that would either become useful energy or dangerous recklessness, depending on how things went. The quiet woman, Holly Mercer, had booked the trip last minute. She carried a worn journal with pressed flowers between its pages. When she thought no one was looking, I noticed her wiping away tears. The weather was moody that day, with low clouds hanging over the canyon like a threat. We'd made camp near a rocky outcrop that offered a decent view of the Snake River twisting below. The canyon walls were steep and jagged, layered with centuries of rock that spoke of ancient times. The weathered striations reminded me of the stories my grandfather used to tell, layers of time exposed, each one with its own secrets. As the day dimmed into evening, I gathered everyone around to go over the next day's route, figuring we'd start early and make it to a safer spot before any potential rain. I kept an eye on the sky, thinking that the last thing we needed was to be caught in a canyon flash flood. "Rain's coming tomorrow afternoon," I told them, pointing to the western horizon where dark clouds were massing. "We'll be up at dawn to break camp. I want to hit the Snake River crossing before noon." Jessica raised her hand like she was in class. "I read that this area has some indigenous artifacts. Will we see any of those?" "If they're there, they stay there," I said firmly. "This land has seen enough looting." The first odd sign came when I noticed something off about our surroundings, a certain quiet that didn't sit right. Hell's Canyon is known for its wildlife, elk, coyotes, even the occasional black bear, but this silence felt unnatural, like nature itself had taken a collective breath and held it. The forest was dense and thick with ponderosa pines, but you could usually hear something rustling around even in the evening. That night, though, nothing, not even the whistle of wind through the canyon. Dale, the former firefighter, was fiddling with his flashlight when he muttered something about a weird smell. I leaned over, sniffing the air, and caught it too. A sour metallic tang, faint at first, but growing more distinct. I passed it off as some sulfurous pocket opening up from the canyon, though it was unlike anything I'd ever come across out here. "Probably just some mineral deposits," I said, more to reassure myself than him. "Canyon's full of strange smells." We split up to set up camp, Dale volunteering to grab firewood. The others stayed close to the camp, chatting nervously, as if they could sense that something wasn't right but couldn't quite place it. I headed down to a creek about 100 yards off to fill some canteens. The water was slow-moving, reflecting the twilight sky in rippling fragments. I knelt, filling the first canteen when I saw it. A flash of white on the opposite bank, too big to be just a reflection or some trick of the light. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. The shape was indistinct, like a large animal crouched low in the bushes, watching. Its form reminded me of a mountain lion, yet the way it held still was unnerving. I blinked, and the white blur was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Chalk it up to my imagination, I thought, or maybe the fatigue from leading these folks up and down rocky slopes. But as I made my way back to camp, the hairs on my neck stood rigid. Something was watching us. I could feel eyes tracking my movements, patient and calculating. Back at the camp, Ethan and Jessica were huddled together, looking at their camera displays and giggling. Holly sat alone, writing in her journal, her pen moving in tight, urgent strokes. The normalcy of the scene almost made me dismiss my unease. Almost. I returned to camp and things seemed relatively normal until Dale stumbled back, his face paler than the moonlight breaking through the clouds. He dropped the bundle of firewood at his feet and stammered something about something moving out there. He claimed he'd seen an animal, tall as a bear but leaner, with long limbs that bent in ways they shouldn't. I brushed it off, suggesting it was just a trick of the shadows or perspective, but Dale wouldn't let it go. For a big guy who boasted about fearlessness, he looked genuinely rattled. "I'm telling you, Clay," he insisted, his voice dropping to a whisper so the others wouldn't hear. 20 years fighting fires. I've seen bears, mountain lions, you name it. This wasn't any of those. It was watching me, following me. It knew I saw it. The crack of a branch somewhere beyond our camp perimeter silenced our conversation. All of us turned toward the sound, peering into the darkness that had settled over the canyon like a shroud. That's when I knew we weren't alone in Hell's Canyon, and whatever was out there was getting closer. I decided to scout around, partly to ease Dale's mind and partly to satisfy my own growing unease. Armed with just my flashlight and the hunting knife I always carried, I ventured into the woods near our camp, stepping carefully over branches and rocks. Every few feet I'd stop and listen, but there was only the deafening silence pressing in on me. "Stay close to the fire," I instructed the others. "No wandering off, not even a few steps. We don't know what wildlife might be active tonight." Holly looked up from her journal, her eyes narrowing. "You said this area wasn't known for dangerous predators." "It's not," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just standard precaution." The smell had grown stronger, that metallic odor mixed with something else now. Something that reminded me of rotting meat. I moved away from camp, sweeping my flashlight in deliberate arcs, searching for anything unusual. The beam caught only trees and rocks, nothing out of place. Yet the feeling of being watched intensified with each step. Then I saw it. A figure, a dark elongated shape moving between the trees. It moved with a jerky gait, pausing and lurching, as if testing the ground with each step. For a brief moment its head turned in my direction, and I felt a chill run through me as I realized this thing wasn't just watching me, it was assessing me, like a predator sizing up its next meal. Its frame was gaunt, almost skeletal, with limbs that seemed too long for its body, giving it an unnatural, insect-like quality. I backed up slowly, not daring to break eye contact until I'd nearly tripped over a rock. By the time I steadied myself and looked back, it was gone. Whatever it was, it had vanished back into the darkness, leaving no trace behind. Back at camp, I kept what I'd seen to myself, but I told everyone to stay close to the fire and keep their lights on. The college kids laughed it off, cracking jokes about Bigfoot. "Sasquatch sighting," Ethan joked, holding his arms out and lumbering around. "Maybe we'll make the local news." But Dale just sat there, his gaze fixed on the shadows beyond the firelight. The man who had charged into burning buildings was now jumping at every sound from the forest. "I've got an extra knife in my pack," I told Dale quietly. "Keep it on you." He nodded grimly, taking the blade and testing its weight in his palm. Around midnight, things took a turn. We heard rustling, followed by a low scraping sound, like claws dragging over stone. It circled our camp, the sound coming closer, then moving away, taunting us. It felt deliberate, like this thing was testing us, trying to gauge our reactions. Dale grabbed a stick from the fire, waving it in the air like a makeshift torch. But even he knew that if this thing decided to come closer, his burning stick wouldn't stand a chance. "What is that?" Jessica whispered, her earlier bravado crumbling. "Clay? What's out there?" "Probably just a coyote," I lied. "They get curious sometimes." The noise stopped, and for a while there was only silence. Just when I thought maybe it had moved on, we heard a scream, a sharp guttural cry that cut through the night like a blade. It was Holly. She'd wandered a few feet from camp to use the bathroom and hadn't told anyone. By the time we got to her, it was too late. She was on the ground, her throat slashed open in a jagged line, eyes wide in terror. Dale and I dragged her back to camp, but it was no use. She was gone. The college kids were frantic, clutching each other and sobbing. I told them to stay calm, but the truth was, I had no plan. We were stuck in the middle of Hell's Canyon, hours from help with no cell service, and a creature lurking in the shadows that could kill us before we even knew it was there. Her blood left a dark trail across the rocky ground, glistening in the firelight. Jessica couldn't stop screaming until Ethan finally covered her mouth with his hand, desperately shushing her. "It'll hear us," he kept saying. "It'll know where we are." "It already knows where we are," Dale said, his voice hollow. The next few hours were a blur of fear and desperation. We huddled by the fire, every snap of a twig sending us into a frenzy of flashlights and hushed whispers. Dale kept muttering about the thing he'd seen, swearing it looked like it had too many joints, too many angles to be any animal he recognized. At some point I must have nodded off, because I woke to Dale shaking my shoulder, his face inches from mine, his eyes wild. He whispered that he'd seen it again, that it was closer this time, creeping through the trees like it was daring us to make a move. I grabbed my knife and we both stood by the edge of the firelight trying to spot it before it could reach us. Then we heard it, a sickening crunch like bones snapping underfoot. I turned my flashlight toward the sound, and there it was, hunched over Holly's body, dragging her limp form toward the trees. It looked up, its face a grotesque mixture of wolf-like features twisted in a way that defied logic. Its mouth was open wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth, yellowed and crooked. Without thinking, I lunged forward, shouting at Dale to help, but he froze, rooted to the spot, watching in horror as the creature dropped Holly's body and turned its full attention on us. Its eyes were dark pits, void of any light or recognition. Just hunger. I swung my knife, but it barely flinched, dodging back with a fluid motion that seemed almost taunting. Jessica screamed, and that was enough to snap Dale out of his trance. He grabbed his burning stick and thrust it at the creature, driving it back a few paces. But it didn't run. It just tilted its head, watching us with a curiosity that made my skin crawl. Finally, it slipped back into the darkness, disappearing into the trees, leaving us with Holly's bloodied body and a silence that felt heavier than before. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night, just sat there, weapons in hand, waiting for the first light of dawn. As the darkness slowly gave way to gray light, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. In the dirt near our camp, a set of footprints, not animal tracks, but not quite human either. The prints were elongated, with what looked like claw marks at the ends of what should have been toes, and they led in both directions, into and out of our camp. The thing had been watching us long before we ever noticed it. When the sun finally crested over the canyon walls, I took stock of what remained. 3 terrified hikers, 1 body, and a memory that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Holly's body lay where we'd dragged it, covered with Dale's jacket. Her face had taken on the waxy pallor of death, making her look like a discarded doll rather than the quiet woman who'd been writing in her journal just hours before. "We need to move," I said, gathering our essentials. "Leave the tents and everything else. Just take water, food, and anything you can use as a weapon." "What about Holly?" Jessica asked, her voice cracking. "We can't just leave her." "We have to," Dale said. His voice had a new edge to it, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "She's gone, and carrying a body will slow us down. I'll mark the GPS coordinates," I said, already tapping the device hanging from my belt. "We'll report it as soon as we get reception." We moved quickly, packing only what we needed. As I was gathering my things, I noticed Holly's journal lying open where she'd left it. Something made me pick it up and flip through the pages. Most entries were personal reflections, but the last page chilled me. It was dated the day before and contained a single line. "Something's watching me from the trees." I tucked the journal into my pack. Evidence, I told myself, though I wasn't sure who would believe us. The daytime brought little comfort as we made our way down the trail. The canyon's scale seemed to mock our insignificance. Massive stone walls rising thousands of feet above us, carved by the Snake River over millennia. Under normal circumstances, I would have pointed out geological features or wildlife to the group. Today we moved in tense silence, each of us scanning the terrain for any sign of movement. I've never heard of any predator in North America that hunts humans like that, Dale said as we navigated a particularly steep section of trail. Bears attack when threatened. Mountain lions take down deer or elk. But that thing, it was hunting us specifically. Maybe it was rabid, Ethan suggested. Some diseased wolf or cougar. I shook my head. No disease I know of makes an animal look like that. We'd been hiking for about 2 hours when Jessica stopped suddenly, pointing to something off the trail. Look, is that a cabin? Through the trees I could make out a weathered structure. A small hunter's cabin, or old ranger outpost, long abandoned by the looks of it. It sat nestled against the canyon wall, half hidden by overgrowth. It's not on any of my maps, I said, studying the structure. Might be private property or something unregistered. Could have a radio, Dale suggested. Or at least be safer than spending another night in the open. I hesitated. The cabin looked ancient, its log walls gray with age, the small windows dark and empty. But Dale was right. Walls would be better than nothing, and we might find something useful inside. I nodded, and we carefully made our way toward it. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, creaking as I pushed it open. The interior was a single room with a stone fireplace, a small table, and what had once been a cot but was now just a metal frame with rotted canvas. Dust covered everything, undisturbed for what looked like years. No one's been here in a long time, I said, scanning the cabin's interior. Jessica coughed from the dust we'd stirred up. This place gives me the creeps. She wasn't wrong. There was something unsettling about the cabin, beyond just its abandoned state. Crude symbols had been carved into the wooden supports. Not graffiti, but deliberate markings that reminded me of protective signs I'd seen in some of the older Cherokee communities. Dale was inspecting the fireplace. Look at this, he called. On the stone mantel above the fireplace sat several small objects. Animal bones arranged in a pattern, a jar containing what looked like teeth, and a leather-bound book so old the binding had cracked and split. Don't touch anything, I warned. But Dale had already picked up the book. It's a journal, he said, carefully turning the brittle pages. Dates back to the 1890s. Some trapper named Elias Blackwood. What does it say? Ethan asked, peering over Dale's shoulder. Dale squinted at the faded handwriting. A lot of it's hard to make out. Talks about trapping, hunting. Wait, listen to this. It has followed me for 3 days now. The Nez Perce call it Siatko, but have another name they won't speak aloud. They say it was here before the rivers cut the canyons. A cold sensation spread through my chest. Keep reading. March 18, 1891. Found Richardson torn apart a mile from camp. No animal takes just the organs like that. The others wanted to leave, but the spring melt has made the river impassable. We are trapped here with it. Dale looked up, his face ashen. There's more, but the writing gets shakier, harder to read. This thing has been here for over 100 years, Jessica whispered. Longer, I said, thinking of Holly's slashed throat. Much longer. A sudden thud against the cabin's exterior made us all freeze. Something was outside, moving around the perimeter. We could hear it scraping against the logs, testing the structure. It followed us, Ethan whispered. Dale snapped the journal shut and shoved it into his pack. We need to barricade the door. We moved quickly, dragging the metal cot frame against the door and positioning ourselves away from the windows. The scratching continued, moving methodically around the cabin. It's looking for a way in, I said, gripping my knife. The scratching stopped at one of the windows, and for a moment there was silence. Then a long, pale hand with too many joints pressed against the glass, leaving a smear of something dark and viscous. Jessica stifled a scream as the creature's face appeared behind the hand, the same twisted wolf-like features I'd seen in the darkness but now visible in daylight. Its skin was a pallid gray, stretched tight over an elongated skull. Those empty eyes stared directly at us, unblinking. Holy shit, Dale breathed. What the hell is that thing? The creature tilted its head, as if considering Dale's question. Then it opened its mouth, revealing those rows of jagged teeth, and pressed its face closer to the glass. The window creaked under the pressure. "The glass won't hold," I warned, backing toward the fireplace. As if in response, the creature suddenly pulled back from the window. We heard its footsteps receding, fading into silence. "Is it gone?" Ethan asked after several long minutes. "I don't think so," I replied. "It's waiting for us, or planning something." "We can't stay here," Dale said, hefting his pack. "That thing knows we're trapped." "But we can't go out there either," Jessica protested. I looked at the old journal in Dale's pack. Maybe there's something in there that can help us. Some way to fight this thing or drive it away. Dale nodded and pulled out the journal again, flipping to the later pages. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he read. This trapper Blackwood, he tried everything. Guns, traps, fire. Nothing worked. He writes about how they lost men one by one. Dale turned another page. "Wait, here's something." He says the Nez Perce told him the creature avoids water. Not because it can't cross it, but because water disrupts its ability to feed on fear. He looked up. That's what it's doing. Blackwood says it was toying with them, making them terrified before it attacked. It feeds on fear first, flesh second. "The Snake River," I said suddenly. "If we can reach the river crossing, maybe we can get away from it." "It's at least 4 miles," Dale pointed out. "Better than waiting here to die," I replied. We gathered our things, preparing to make a run for it. The plan was simple. Move fast, stay together, head straight for the river crossing. According to the old journal, the creature wouldn't follow us across deep water. "Ready?" I asked, hand on the makeshift barricade. They nodded, faces set with determination born of desperation. I moved the cot frame and eased the door open, peering out. The forest around the cabin was quiet, no sign of our hunter. "Now," I whispered, and we bolted. We ran like hell was at our heels, which in a way it was. The trail down to the Snake River was steep and treacherous, loose rocks sliding beneath our feet as we scrambled over terrain better taken slowly and carefully. But caution was a luxury we couldn't afford. "Keep moving," I shouted as Ethan stumbled on a sharp descent. Dale grabbed his arm, hauling him upright without breaking stride. The distant roar of the Snake River grew louder as we descended, a promising sound that spurred us on. I kept glancing back, expecting to see that gaunt figure loping after us, but the trail behind remained clear. "Maybe we lost it," Jessica panted, her face streaked with sweat and dirt. "Don't count on it," Dale replied grimly. We'd covered maybe half the distance to the river when we reached a narrow section of trail that hugged the canyon wall. To our right, the path fell away in a sheer drop of several hundred feet. We would have to move single file, with no room for error. "Stay close to the wall," I instructed, taking the lead, one foot directly in front of the other. We inched along the narrow ledge, pressed against the rough stone of the canyon wall. I was halfway across when I heard it, a low gurgling sound from somewhere above us. Looking up, I saw the creature perched on an outcropping 20 feet above the trail. It watched us with those empty eyes, its body coiled like a spring. "Don't stop," I said quietly. "Keep moving, slow and steady." The creature shifted position, moving with that same unnatural fluidity I'd seen before. It was paralleling our progress, keeping pace as we navigated the narrow ledge. Dale was directly behind me, with Jessica and Ethan following. I could hear their ragged breathing, the scrape of their boots on rock. We were almost to the wider section of trail when the creature made its move. It leaped from its perch, not toward us, but to a position on the trail ahead, blocking our path. In the full light of day, it was even more horrifying, standing nearly 7 feet tall on its hind legs, its limbs too thin and jointed for its frame. The skin was not fur or hide, but a gray, leathery texture that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Back up," I said, pushing Dale behind me. "Move back to wider ground." But as we started to retreat, a section of the trail crumbled beneath Ethan's feet. He let out a startled cry as he pitched sideways toward the drop. Jessica grabbed for him, catching his arm, but the momentum pulled her forward as well. "Help!" she screamed, as both of them teetered on the edge. Dale lunged, catching Jessica around the waist. For one terrible moment, all three of them wavered on the brink, Then Dale planted his feet and heaved backward, pulling them to safety in a tangle of limbs. The creature watched this drama unfold, its head tilted in that eerie, curious way. Then it took a step toward us, extending one of those two long arms. "The journal," I said to Dale. "What else did it say? How did they fight it?" Dale scrambled to pull the journal from his pack. "Blackwood tried to burn it," he said, flipping pages frantically. "Says fire hurt it but didn't kill it." I pulled out my Zippo lighter, a habit from my smoking days that I'd never quite abandoned. "Get ready to run," I told the others. As the creature took another step forward, I flicked the lighter and threw it directly at its face. The flame caught on what might have been its fur or hair, spreading quickly across its head. The creature let out a shriek that sounded like metal scraping against stone, thrashing as the fire consumed its upper body. It staggered backward, then toppled over the edge of the trail, plummeting into the canyon below. We didn't wait to see if it survived the fall. We ran, scrambling along the trail as fast as we dared, not stopping until we reached wider, safer ground. "Did we kill it?" Jessica gasped, bent double and fighting for breath. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we need to keep moving. The river isn't far now." As we continued down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only bought ourselves time, not victory. Something that had hunted in these canyons for over a century wouldn't be defeated so easily. The trail finally opened onto a wider path that wound down to the river's edge. The Snake River stretched before us, about 60 feet across at this point. Its current swift but not impassable. The crossing point featured a line of large stepping stones that were usually above water this time of year, allowing hikers to cross without getting more than their boots wet. "There's our way out," I said, pointing to the stones. We hurried to the river's edge, relief flooding through us at the sight of salvation so close. The stepping stones were partially submerged due to recent rains, but still visible enough to use. "I'll go first," I told them. "Follow my exact path." I stepped out onto the first stone, testing it before committing my weight. It held firm, and I moved to the second, then the third. The current pushed against my legs, strong but manageable. I was about halfway across when I heard Jessica scream. Turning back, I saw the creature emerging from the tree line, still smoking from the fire but very much alive. Parts of its face had been burned away, revealing bone or something like it underneath. It moved more slowly now, but with a terrible purpose, heading straight for my remaining companions on the shore. "Get in the water," I shouted. "Now." Dale reacted first, pulling Jessica toward the river. Ethan hesitated, fumbling with his camera, trying to capture an image of the thing pursuing us. "Ethan, leave it," Dale yelled, but the young man was transfixed, backing away slowly as he focused his lens on the approaching horror. The creature lunged forward with sudden speed, closing the distance to Ethan in a heartbeat. Its clawed hand slashed out, catching him across the chest. Ethan screamed, dropping his camera as blood bloomed across his University of Oregon sweatshirt. Dale charged back up the bank, wielding a large branch like a club. He swung it at the creature's head, connecting with a solid thud that staggered it. "Run," he shouted to Ethan, who stumbled toward the water, clutching his wounded chest. I waded back toward shore, fighting against the current, desperate to help. Jessica was already in the water up to her waist, reaching out for Ethan. Dale backed toward the river, still facing the creature, branch raised defensively. The creature shook off the blow and fixed those empty eyes on Dale. It let out a sound that might have been laughter, a dry, rattling noise that carried over the rush of the river. Then it spoke. The voice wasn't human, but the words were clear enough. "You taste better afraid." Dale faltered, the branch trembling in his hands. "What the fuck are you?" The creature tilted its head again. "Older than your kind, hungrier." It moved forward, and Dale swung the branch again. This time the creature caught it easily, wrenching it from his grasp and snapping it like a twig. Dale turned to run, but the creature was faster, grabbing him by the shoulder and spinning him around. I reached the shore, knife in hand, but I was too late. The creature plunged its other hand into Dale's chest, not slashing this time, but reaching inside him. Dale's eyes bulged in shock and agony. His mouth opened in a silent scream as the creature withdrew its hand, holding something dark and glistening. Dale's heart still pumping feebly. "No," Jessica screamed as Dale's body crumpled to the ground. The creature raised the heart to its mouth and bit into it like an apple, black fluid running down its chin. Then it turned its attention to us. I grabbed Ethan, who was swaying on his feet, blood loss making him dizzy. "Into the water," I ordered, pulling him toward the river. "Deep as you can go." We waded in, the current threatening to sweep our feet from under us. Jessica was already midstream, sobbing as she struggled across. The creature followed us to the water's edge but stopped there, watching with those terrible eyes. "It won't cross," I said, relief surging through me. But as we reached the deeper part of the river, the creature did something unexpected. It lowered itself to all fours and began to circle the crossing point, moving upstream at an alarming pace. "It's looking for another way across," I realized. "We need to hurry." Ethan was growing weaker, leaning heavily on me as we fought our way through the current. Jessica had reached the far bank and was waving frantically for us to hurry. The river water around us was turning pink with Ethan's blood. "Stay with me," I urged him. "We're almost there." We were nearing the far shore when I heard Jessica scream again. Looking up, I saw the creature on the opposite bank, having circled upstream and crossed where the river narrowed. It was now making its way down toward Jessica, cutting off our escape route. "Back," I told Ethan, turning us midstream. "We need to go back." But Ethan's strength was failing. He sagged against me, his face ashen. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't make it." The current caught us, pulling us downstream. I fought to keep our heads above water, clinging to Ethan with one arm while trying to steer us toward the bank we'd just left. The creature stood on the shore, watching our struggle, making no move to help or hinder. It was waiting, savoring our fear. I managed to grab onto a protruding rock, stopping our drift. With a tremendous effort, I hauled Ethan toward the shore. The creature remained where it was, blocking our path to safety. Jessica was nowhere to be seen. Either she'd fled into the forest, or the thing had already gotten to her. As we reached the shallows, Ethan stumbled and fell face first into the water. I pulled him up, his body limp and unresponsive. Turning him over, I saw that his eyes were open but vacant. He'd lost too much blood. The creature made that terrible laughing sound again, and took a step toward us. I stood over Ethan's body, knife raised, knowing it would do no good but unwilling to die without a fight. "You can't have him," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The creature stopped, regarding me with what almost seemed like respect. "Brave," it said in that inhuman voice. "Rare." It took another step and I braced myself for the end. The shot came from somewhere behind me, a deafening crack that echoed across the canyon. The creature jerked as something hit it in the shoulder, spraying that black fluid into the air. It shrieked, a sound so high and piercing that I had to cover my ears. More shots followed, 3 in rapid succession. The creature staggered backward, wounds opening across its chest and neck. It turned to flee, but another shot caught it in the leg, dropping it to one knee. I spun around to see Jessica standing on a rock outcropping, Dale's revolver in her hands, the gun he'd kept in his pack for emergencies. Her face was a mask of rage and grief as she fired again, the bullet striking the creature in the head. It fell backward, thrashing on the ground. Black fluid pooled beneath it, seeping into the earth. Its movements grew weaker, more spasmodic. Finally, it lay still. Jessica climbed down from the rocks, the gun still trained on the motionless form. "Is it dead?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I approached cautiously, knife ready. The creature didn't move as I nudged it with my boot. The wounds were substantial. The head shot had taken away most of its face, revealing a skull structure unlike anything I'd ever seen. It looked almost human, but the proportions were wrong, the bone too dense and ancient-looking. "I think so," I said, though uncertainty gnawed at me. Something this old, this unnatural. Could bullets really kill it? Jessica nodded, then turned to look at Ethan's body, still lying half in the water. Her face crumpled. "He's gone, isn't he?" "I'm sorry," I said. "I couldn't save him." She knelt beside him, gently closing his eyes. "He just wanted an adventure," she whispered, "something to tell his friends about." I thought of Holly's journal entry, "Something's watching me from the trees," and Dale's last moments. His heart ripped from his chest. This was an adventure none of us would ever forget, though only two of us remained to remember it. "We need to go," I said after giving her a moment. "Find help. Report what happened." Jessica nodded, rising to her feet. She looked down at the gun in her hands, then tucked it into her waistband. "What do we tell them about this thing?" I looked at the creature's remains. Already they seemed to be deteriorating, the flesh turning to a gray, ash-like substance. By the time we brought anyone back here, there might be nothing left to find. "The truth," I said, "as much of it as they'll believe." We gathered what we could. Dale's pack, Jessica's camera with the images Ethan had taken, Holly's journal. Evidence, though. Whether anyone would accept it was another matter. The Rangers would come eventually, drawn by the smoke from our abandoned camp or by search parties when we failed to return on schedule. As we prepared to leave, Jessica paused, looking down at the creature's dissolving form. "What was it? Really?" I thought of the journal we'd found in the cabin, of the Nez Perce name, Chatko, and the older name they wouldn't speak aloud. I thought of the creature's words, "Older than your kind, hungrier." "I don't know," I admitted. "Something that doesn't belong in our world. Something that's been here longer than we have." We made our way along the riverbank, following it downstream where the trail would be less treacherous. Neither of us spoke much, both lost in our thoughts and grief. The sun was beginning to set, painting the canyon walls in fiery reds and deep purples. In other circumstances, it would have been beautiful. The Rangers arrived by late afternoon the next day, drawn by the smoke from signal fires we'd built on the riverbank. We told them everything, but they just looked at us like we were crazy, like we'd imagined the whole thing. They took Holly's body and Ethan's, and promised to file a report, but I could tell they didn't believe a word of it. Later, as we were packing up, one of the Rangers pulled me aside. He was older than the others, his face weathered by years in the wilderness. He told me stories about sightings in the area, old legends of a creature that was neither wolf nor man, something that lived off fear as much as flesh. He didn't have a name for it, just a nod and a warning. "Don't come back here alone." As for that creature, the ranger claimed it was something ancient, something that thrived in places forgotten by time. "The old-timers say there's more than one," he told me quietly, "that they sleep for decades, sometimes centuries, waking only when they hunger." I thought of the disintegrating remains we'd left behind. Had we really killed it or merely wounded it? Would it heal, retreating to some dark corner of the canyon to recover and hunt again? I never returned to Hell's Canyon after that. I gave up guiding altogether, moved east to the flatlands where I could always see what was coming. Jessica went back to college but dropped out before graduating. We kept in touch for a while, bound by our shared trauma, but eventually drifted apart. Some experiences are too heavy to carry together. Sometimes on cold nights when the wind sounds like something scraping against my window, I remember those empty eyes watching me from the trees. I remember the creature's words, "You taste better afraid," and I wonder if it still hunts in that deep gorge, patient and ancient, waiting for the next group of hikers who wander too far from the beaten path. Because that's the thing about places like Hell's Canyon. They earned their names for a reason, and some predators never truly die. They just wait for the right moment to return, when the fear has faded and the warnings have been forgotten. I still have Holly's journal, and sometimes I read her final entry. "Something's watching me from the trees." A simple observation that carries more weight than she could have known. Because in the wildest parts of this world, where the canyons are deep and the forests are old, there are things watching from the shadows, things that have been watching us since before we knew how to be afraid. And they're still watching now,